I'm Anya, 32, female, and my parents just disowned me for refusing to sell my life's work to bail out my brother. It happened on my father's 60th birthday, a day that was supposed to be a milestone celebration, but instead became the final, crumbling end of a bridge I had spent my entire life trying to cross. As I stood on their front porch, with the cheerful sounds of a party filtering through the closed door, my father's words echoed in the cold evening air, a gavel strike on a relationship that had been on trial for decades. But as the shock on their faces gave way to righteous anger, a strange calm settled over me. I smiled, a small, quiet thing they couldn't possibly understand. They thought they were delivering a final, devastating blow. They had no idea I'd been preparing for this day for years. The oak door of my childhood home felt like a barrier to a foreign country. Inside, I could hear the familiar cadence of my uncle's laughter and the light, tinkling sound of my aunt's favorite wind chimes on the back patio. It was my father Richard's 60th birthday party. I held a tastefully wrapped gift in my hands, a rare first edition copy of his favorite author's novel, something I had spent months tracking down. It felt heavy, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of the gesture, a peace offering I knew deep down would likely be rejected. My partner, Oliver, squeezed my hand before I rang the bell. "You don't have to do this," he had said in the car. "You don't owe them a performance." "I know," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I need to do this for me, to know I tried one last time." Oliver, a lawyer with a mind as sharp as his tailored suits, understood the value of finality. He gave me a nod of support and promised to wait in the car just a block away. "Call me the second you need me." I rang the doorbell. The cheerful sounds from inside paused for a moment. Footsteps approached and the door swung open, not wide in welcome, but just enough for my mother, Carol, to block the entrance. Her smile was a tight, brittle thing, a mask of social grace that didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, were as cold as a winter lake. "Anya," she said, her voice clipped, "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face here." Behind her, my father appeared. His face, usually ruddy and prone to laughter, was dark with a thunderous expression. "What do you want?" he boomed, not even trying to hide his hostility. The gift in my hands suddenly felt foolish. "It's your birthday, Dad, I came to." "You're not welcome here," he cut me off. His voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the guests just inside the foyer. A few faces, my aunts and uncles, peeked around the corner with expressions of curiosity and discomfort. "Not after what you did, not after you betrayed your brother." This was the heart of it, the festering wound that had finally turned septic. My brother Ethan, the golden child, the center of my parents' universe, had once again crashed and burned. And I, for the first time, had refused to be the designated firefighter. The favoritism wasn't a subtle undercurrent in our family. It was the main event, a daily pageant where Ethan was always crowned king. I have a vivid memory from my 18th birthday. I'd spent the entire summer working at a greasy diner, saving every penny for a car. My dream car was a beat-up, decade-old sedan I'd found for sale. On my birthday morning, I proudly showed my parents my savings jar nearly full. They smiled vaguely and said, "That's nice, dear." Later that afternoon, a brand new cherry red convertible rolled into the driveway with a giant bow on it. It was for Ethan, an early present for his 17th birthday. To encourage his ambition, my father had announced grandly. I was told my ambition to buy a used car was practical, a word they always used for me, making it sound synonymous with uninspired. The pattern repeated itself with our education. Ethan, who had grand but vague ideas about changing the world through business, was sent to an expensive private university, all expenses paid. His tuition, his apartment, his networking budget, it was all covered. They spoke of it as an investment in a visionary. When I wanted to study English literature at a more affordable state school, I was told it was time for me to learn financial responsibility. An English degree, Anya. "What will you do with that? Open a library?" My father had scoffed. The irony was that's almost exactly what I did. I cobbled together scholarships, worked 3 part-time jobs, and took out loans that I was still paying off. I graduated with honors, a fact that earned me another "that's nice, dear" from my mother over the phone. But the starkest contrast came when we entered the professional world. Ethan, armed with his expensive degree and my parents' bottomless faith, decided to launch a tech startup. It was an app thought. T did something nebulous with cryptocurrency and social media influencers. My father, a man who still struggled to send a text message, called it the future. He and my mother liquidated a portion of their retirement savings to give Ethan a six-figure check for his seed money. Meanwhile, I used my meager savings from years of relentless work to lease a small, dusty storefront in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I spent months cleaning it, building shelves by hand, and scouring estate sales for unique second-hand books. I learned how to be a barista and baked my own pastries in a tiny convection oven. My dream, the reading nook, was born not from a massive investment, but from sweat, calluses, and an unshakable belief in the quiet power of stories. My parents never once visited during those grueling first few years. To them, my bookstore was a quaint hobby, not a real business like Ethan's. Standing at the door, facing their collective fury, I realized that all those years of being sidelined had been a form of training. They had taught me to rely on no one but myself. They had forced me to build a foundation of my own, far away from the shaky ground of their approval, and that foundation was about to be tested. The demand came 3 weeks before the birthday party on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other. The morning rush at the reading nook had been pleasantly chaotic, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and the gentle murmur of customers. I was in my small back office, finalizing the payroll when my phone rang. It was my mother. My first instinct, a sad, conditioned reflex, was to assume something was wrong with Ethan. I was rarely wrong. Anya, we need to see you, she said, her voice strained with an unfamiliar urgency. Your father and I and Ethan, can you come over for dinner tonight? An impromptu family dinner was a red flag. Our interactions were usually confined to scheduled holiday appearances, where I would smile politely and listen to endless praise about Ethan's latest venture. Is everything okay? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We'll discuss it tonight, just come, the line went dead. I called Oliver immediately. It's a summons, I told him, a knot tightening in my stomach. The whole family, it has to be about Ethan's startup. Oliver's voice was calm and steadying. Okay, don't agree to anything, don't promise anything, just listen, call me right after. That evening I walked into my parents' house, the same house I now stood before, disowned. The atmosphere inside was thick with a funereal gloom. Ethan was slumped on the living room sofa, staring at the floor. He looked like a deflated balloon, all his usual swagger gone. My parents were sitting in their matching armchairs, their faces etched with worry. This was the scene of the intervention, only I wasn't the subject, I was apparently the solution. My father gestured for me to sit. There was no small talk, no asking about my day or my business. He got straight to the point. Ethan's company is in trouble, he said, his voice heavy. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. It's not just in trouble, Dad, it's over. We lost our biggest investor, the whole thing. It's collapsed. He buried his face in his hands. My mother rushed to his side, rubbing his back soothingly. Now, Ethan, it's not over. We won't let it be over. That's why your sister is here. All eyes turned to me. I felt like an actor who had just been pushed onto a stage without a script. I'm sorry to hear that, Ethan, I said genuinely. Despite our history, he was still my brother. What happened? It doesn't matter what happened, my father snapped. What matters is fixing it. Ethan needs a cash infusion to bridge this gap. To get back on his feet, he needs $500,000. The number hung in the air, so absurdly large it felt unreal. I must have looked as stunned as I felt because my mother continued in a soft, persuasive tone as if explaining something to a child. We've already given him everything we can, dear. Our savings are gone. The retirement fund is empty. She said this with a strange sort of pride, as if it were a noble sacrifice. I stared at them, my mind racing. And where do you think I have $500,000? My father leaned forward, his eyes boring into me. Your store, that little bookstore of yours, we know you're doing well. It's in a prime location now. The property value has skyrocketed. You can sell it. An investor would snap it up in a heartbeat. The room went silent. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a statement of fact, a plan that they had clearly discussed and agreed upon without me. They were talking about my life's work, the place I had poured every ounce of my being into, as if it were a spare part to be sold off to fix their favorite machine. Sell the reading nook, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. You want me to sell my business. It's not just a business, Anya, it's a lifeline for your brother, my mother cried, her voice rising with emotion. He could lose everything, his reputation, his future. Your store is just books and coffee. Ethan is building something that could change the world. I looked from my mother's pleading face to my father's stern one, and then to my brother who was now watching me with a glimmer of hope in his tear-filled eyes. He actually expected me to do this. They all did. They saw my success not as something I had earned for myself, but as a resource they were entitled to, a family emergency fund that I was selfishly hoarding. The cold, hard clarity washed over me. It was the moment the final illusion shattered. I wasn't their daughter in that room, I was their asset. No, I said, my voice was quiet, but it cut through the heavy silence like a shard of glass. My father blinked. What did you say? I said no, I repeated, my voice stronger now. I will not sell my business, I will not sell my home, I will not sell my future to pay for Ethan's mistakes. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Mistakes? He's your brother, this is what family does, we support each other. You support him, I shot back, the words tumbling out, years of resentment finally finding a voice. You have always supported him, you paid for his college, you funded this startup, you've bailaid him out of every problem he's ever had. I built my business with my own two hands, with no help from anyone, it's mine, and I am not setting it on fire to keep Ethan warm. Ethan jumped to his feet. You're just jealous, he yelled. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad knew I had real potential. The cruelty of his words, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement was the final confirmation. I stood up, my bag in my hand. I'm sorry your business failed, Ethan. Truly I am, but this is your problem to solve. My answer is no. I walked out of the house, leaving a storm of shouting behind me. As I drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I didn't feel sadness or guilt. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of freedom. I had finally said the word I had been swallowing my entire life. No, and I knew with absolute certainty that they would never forgive me for it. The weeks following my refusal were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The family that had largely ignored my existence for the better part of a decade suddenly made me the singular focus of their attention. It began with my mother. Her calls came every morning just as I was opening the bookstore. Her voice would be thick with manufactured tears. Anya, I don't understand how you can be so cold, she'd begin. Your brother is a wreck, he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep. He feels like such a failure, and you, his own sister, are turning your back on him. I tried to be reasonable at first. Mom, giving him $500,000 isn't a solution, it's a bandage. He needs to learn from this. Learn what? She'd wail. How to be poor, how to give up on his dreams, is that what you want for him? Each conversation was a circular trip through a guilt-ridden maze. My success was framed as a betrayal, my financial prudence as a character flaw. She would talk about the sacrifices they had made for us, conveniently forgetting that the sacrifices were almost entirely for Ethan. She spoke of family loyalty as a one-way street, flowing from me to them with no return traffic expected. Next came my father's offensive. He didn't call, he left voicemails. His tone was cold and laced with disappointment. Anya, your mother is beside herself. You are tearing this family apart over a building. I raised you to have a better sense of priority. It seems I failed. Click, another message a day later. Anya, Ethan had to sell his car today, the one we bought him. He told me it felt like he was selling a piece of his soul. I hope you're happy with your bookstore. Click. The messages were designed to chip away at my resolve, to make me feel small and selfish. For a few days, it worked. I'd lie awake at night, their words echoing in my head. Was I being cruel? Was I destroying my family? During those moments of doubt, Oliver was my anchor. He'd listen patiently as I recounted the latest guilt trip, then he'd gently guide me back to reality. Anya, he said one night, wrapping his arms around me as I cried in frustration. They're not asking for help, they're demanding a sacrifice. There's a difference. What they're doing isn't love, it's emotional extortion. He was right, and his support wasn't just emotional, it was practical. It was during this period that the preparation went from a vague contingency plan to a concrete strategy. For years, I had harbored a secret my parents had long since buried under layers of willful ignorance. About 10 years ago, during the last major financial crisis, my father's contracting business had taken a massive hit. They were on the verge of defaulting on their mortgage, of losing the very house they now stood in judgment of me. Ethan was in college, blissfully unaware, his tuition payments continuing without interruption. I, on the other hand, was working 2 jobs and living in a tiny apartment, saving every dollar I could. When my mother finally broke down and told me the situation, I didn't hesitate. I took my entire life savings, the money I had been setting aside for my bookstore, and gave it to them. It was a staggering amount for me at the time, enough to cover their mortgage payments for 2 years and get them back on solid ground. It wasn't a gift. We went to a lawyer, a cheap one they found, not someone as thorough as Oliver, and signed an agreement. In exchange for the bailout, my name was added to the deed of the house as a tenant in common, giving me a legal percentage of ownership equivalent to my contribution. They were so relieved and frankly embarrassed that they signed the papers quickly. Once the crisis passed and Ethan's needs once again became their primary focus, the entire episode was conveniently forgotten. They never mentioned it again. They never paid me back a cent. They went on living in the house as if it were entirely theirs, and my contribution became a silent, unacknowledged ghost in our family's history. They've forgotten, haven't they? Oliver asked as we sat at our kitchen table, the original deed and agreement spread out before us. Completely, I said. In their minds, I'm just the ungrateful daughter living off the success they enabled, when in reality, they're living in a house I saved. Oliver, in his element as a lawyer, laid out the plan. A partition action, he explained. As a co-owner, you have the legal right to force the sale of the property to cash out your equity. If they can't or won't buy you out for your share, a judge will order the house to be sold and the proceeds divided according to ownership percentage. We spent the next week gathering every piece of documentation: bank statements showing the large fund transfer to my parents' account, the signed legal agreement, the official property deed with my name clearly listed. Oliver prepared the formal legal notice. It felt cold and clinical, but it was also empowering. It was a shield. For my entire life, they had held all the emotional and financial cards. Now I held one of my own, a trump card they didn't even know was in the deck. The pressure campaign from my family reached its peak in the days before my father's party. Ethan started texting me, his messages swinging wildly from pathetic begging, "Anya, please, I'm desperate. I'll pay you back, I swear," to vicious accusations. "You love that stupid store more than your own family. You're a monster." The final straw was a call from my mother the day before the party. "Your father has decided," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "If you do not agree to help your brother by the time of the party tomorrow, you are no longer welcome in this family. He means it, Anya. This is your last chance." She hung up before I could reply, an ultimatum. I held the phone in my hand, my heart pounding. For a moment, the old fear, the old longing to be accepted, washed over me. But then I looked at the folder on my desk, the one with Oliver's carefully prepared documents inside. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. It was about reclaiming the truth of my own life. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room, "last chance it is." The morning of my father's 60th birthday dawned gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of my mood. The invitation to the party, which had been sitting on my kitchen counter for a month, felt like a summons to my own execution. A part of me, the tired, wounded part, wanted to throw it in the trash, lock the door, and pretend my family didn't exist. It would be so easy. I could text a polite, "So sorry I can't make it, happy birthday," and avoid the inevitable confrontation. But another, stronger part of me knew I had to go. Avoiding it would feel like cowardice, like I was letting them have the final word by default. For years, I had allowed their narrative to dominate, the story of the brilliant son and the practical, uninspired daughter. If I didn't show up, that would be the story that calcified into family legend. Anya was so selfish, she couldn't even come to her own father's 60th birthday. This wasn't about winning a fight. It was about ending one on my own terms. It was about standing in the center of the storm they had created and speaking my own truth just once before walking away forever. Are you sure about this? Oliver asked, watching me as I carefully selected an outfit. I chose a simple dark blue dress. It was professional, understated, and felt like armor. I'm sure, I said, meeting high. Seth's eyes in the mirror. I'm not going there to plead my case. I'm going there to close a door, and I want to be the one to do it. I put the legal documents enclosed in a crisp manila folder into my handbag. Touching the smooth surface of the folder sent a jolt of nervous energy through me, but it was mingled with a profound sense of resolve. This was my leverage, my truth in tangible form. The drive to their house was a journey through a landscape of memories. We passed the park where my father taught me to ride a bike, only to leave to take Ethan to his soccer practice. We drove by the old movie theater where I'd seen my first film, a memory soured by the fact that Ethan had gotten to pick the movie. Every street corner held a ghost of a past slight. A small paper cut that had over 32 years bled me dry of any hope for their unconditional love. When we pulled up a block away from the house, the street was already lined with cars. Music and laughter drifted through the air. Oliver turned to me, his expression serious. Remember the plan, he said. You state your position, you give them the documents, you do not get drawn into a screaming match, you are in control. The moment you walk out that door, I'll be right here. I know, thank you, Oliver, for everything. I love you, he said simply. I love you too. Leaving the warmth of the car and stepping into the cool evening air felt like plunging into icy water. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last. The familiar walkway, the rose bushes my mother fussed over, the welcome mat that now felt like a lie, it was all part of a life I was about to surgically remove myself from. I paused on the porch, taking one final deep breath. I clutched the gift for my father in one hand and my purse containing the folder in the other. One was a symbol of the daughter I had tried to be, an offering of peace and love. The other was a symbol of the woman I had been forced to become, a declaration of independence. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone which one they would force me to use. I rang the bell. The door opened to reveal my mother, her face a mask of polite hostility. Behind her stood my father, his arms crossed, a bulldog guarding his territory. The party chatter behind them died down as all eyes turned to the drama unfolding in the doorway. It was exactly as I had pictured, a public trial. Anya, my mother said, her voice dripping with disappointment, I told you the conditions. I came to wish my father a happy birthday, I said, holding out the gift. My voice was steady, a small miracle. My father scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. He ignored the gift completely. Conditions, he bellowed, stepping forward so he and my mother physically blocked the entrance. There are no more conditions. There was one choice, you made the wrong one. From behind them, I saw Ethan. He was leaning against the wall in the foyer, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He had won. In his mind, the final battle was over, and he was the victor, watching his rival be cast out of the kingdom. That single look from him erased any lingering doubt I might have had. You refused to sell your store for $500,000 when your brother needed it. My father's voice boomed, each word a hammer blow. He was projecting, ensuring every guest in the house could hear my sins. You chose a building full of old paper over your own flesh and blood. You are no longer our daughter. The words, as final and absolute as a death sentence, hung in the air. You're no longer our daughter. I had imagined this moment, dreaded it, played it over and over in my mind, but the reality of it was still a shock, a physical blow that took my breath away. I felt the eyes of my relatives on me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I saw my Aunt Judith shake her head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on her face. In that moment, a strange thing happened. The hurt was there, a deep, primal ache of rejection, but beneath it, something else rose up, a wave of pure, unadulterated calm. The worst had happened. The threat they had held over my head for my entire life had finally been carried out. They had pushed the big red button, and I was still standing. I looked at my father's furious face, my mother's cold disapproval, and my brother's smug smirk. They expected me to cry, to beg, to break down, and finally capitulate. They had written the script for this scene, and I was supposed to play the part of the hysterical, penitent daughter. So I did the one thing they never expected. I stared at them in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of their pronouncement settle. I let them see that their ultimate weapon had been fired and had failed to destroy me. Then I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, it was small, knowing, and completely genuine. It was the smile of someone who was finally truly free. The sight of my smile completely bewildered. Them, my father's angry tirade faltered. My mother's mask of composure cracked, replaced by confusion. Ethan's smirk vanished, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. They had no context for this reaction. It was outside the realm of their understanding. "What's so funny?" my father demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "Nothing," I said softly, "and everything." I lowered the gift and placed it gently on the porch beside the door, a final abandoned offering. Then I opened my handbag. "You're right," I said, my voice clear and carrying into the now silent house. "A choice was made, but you have no idea what it was." My fingers closed around the smooth manila folder. The air crackled with tension. This was it. The moment the story they had told themselves for years was about to get a new ending. I pulled the folder from my handbag with a slow, deliberate motion. The simple office supply seemed to command the attention of everyone present. My parents stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "You talk about my store as if it's just a building," I began, my voice even and calm. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. "You talk about the money I've made as if it's some family resource you're entitled to. You seem to have forgotten how I started that business. You seem to have forgotten a lot of things." I looked directly at my father. "Dad, do you remember 10 years ago, when your own business was failing? Do you remember who you called when the bank was about to foreclose on this very house?" A flicker of something unease, a distant memory crossed his face. My mother shifted her weight, her eyes darting away from mine. They remembered. They had just chosen not to. "I remember," I continued, letting the story unfold for the captive audience in their foyer. "I remember getting a frantic call from Mom. I remember draining my entire savings account, the money I had saved for years to start my bookstore, and transferring it to you, not as a gift, as a loan that saved this house." I opened the folder. The first document I pulled out was a copy of the bank transfer statement, the five-figure sum clearly visible. I held it up. "This was my entire future at the time. I gave it to you without a second thought because that's what I thought family did." My father's face was turning pale. Ethan looked utterly baffled, as if hearing a history he never knew existed. "But I was smarter than you gave me credit for even then," I said, pulling out the second document. "I knew a simple loan wasn't enough, so we went to a lawyer, your lawyer actually, and we signed an agreement." I held up the agreement, its crinkled pages a testament to its age. "In exchange for bailing you out, my name was added to the deed of this house, not as a resident but as a co-owner. A tenant in common with a legal financial stake in this property equivalent to my investment, plus compounded interest for the years it's gone unpaid." A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. My aunt's jaw was literally hanging open. I saved the final document for last. "And here," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power, "is a copy of the official county deed." I held it up, my finger pointing to the line where my name, Anya Calloway, was printed right alongside Richard Calloway and Carol Calloway. "I am a legal owner of this house, the house you just threw me out of." The silence was absolute. The color had drained completely from my parents' faces. They looked from the paper to my face and back again, their minds scrambling to process a reality they had buried a decade ago. My father opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Ethan finally found his voice. That's not true, you're lying," he stammered, looking to our parents for confirmation, but their horrified silence was all the confirmation he needed. I turned my attention back to my father. You shouted that I was no longer your daughter. Fine, I accept that, but I am still your business partner, and as of this moment, our partnership is dissolved. I slid the final document from the folder. It was the formal notice of a partition action drafted by Oliver. This is a legal notice, I explained calmly. It states my intention to sell my share of this property. Since you clearly don't have the capital to buy me out, I will be petitioning the court to force a sale of the entire property. The house will be put on the market, and upon its sale, the proceeds will be divided among the legal owners according to their rightful share. My share. My father finally staggered back a step, leaning against the door frame for support. You can't, he whispered, his voice raspy with disbelief. I can, I said, my voice firm. And I will. You wanted me to sell my business to save Ethan. You wanted me to liquidate my life's work. Well, I'm not selling my business. I'm liquidating my asset, the asset I invested in 10 years ago, this house. I placed the notice on top of the abandoned birthday gift on the porch. My lawyer will be in touch with you next week to begin the proceedings. Happy birthday, Dad. Without another word, I turned my back on their stunned, horrified faces. I walked away from the house, from the party, from the family that had never truly been mine. I didn't run. My steps were measured and steady. As I walked down the path, the silence behind me finally broke, not with shouting, but with my mother's low, anguished sob. It was a sound of defeat. I reached the end of the block where Oliver was waiting, the car's engine already running. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. I looked at him, and the dam of composure I had maintained for the last hour finally broke. A single tear rolled down my cheek, followed by another and another. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of release, of a lifetime of weight finally being lifted from my shoulders. Oliver didn't say anything. He just reached over, took my hand, and held it tight. The battle was over, and for the first time in my life, I had won. The weeks that followed were a quiet storm. As predicted, my family's lawyer contacted Oliver. There was a brief, desperate attempt to fight the partition action, but the legal ground was ironclad. The documents were clear, the signatures were theirs, and my claim was undeniable. Their lawyer advised them that fighting would only result in massive legal fees on top of the inevitable loss. They had no choice but to comply. I received no calls, no texts, no voicemails. It was a silence more profound than any shouting match. I had been surgically removed from their lives and they from mine. I blocked their numbers not out of spite but as an act of self-preservation. Oliver handled all communication through their legal counsel. He shielded me from the ugliness, allowing me the space to heal. The for sale sign went up in the front yard of my childhood home 2 months later. Seeing a photo of it online sent a strange pang through my heart, not of regret, but of a sad nostalgia for a family life I had always wanted but never truly had. The house sold quickly in the hot market. The closing was an impersonal affair. We signed our documents in separate rooms at the title company. I never saw their faces. A week later, a wire transfer appeared in my bank account. The number was even larger than I had anticipated. It represented my initial investment, 10 years of compounded interest, and my share of the property's appreciation. It was a fortune I had never expected, born from an act of kindness they had long forgotten. That same day, I walked into my bookstore. The reading nook was bustling, a warm, vibrant haven filled with the gentle sounds of pages turning and quiet conversation. I looked at the shelves I had built, the books I had curated, the community I had fostered. This was real. This was mine. It was something I had created from nothing, sustained through my own hard work, and protected from those who saw it as disposable. With the money from the house, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the owner of my building. I made him an offer to buy the property outright, an offer he happily accepted. The reading nook would no longer be a tenant, it would be a permanent fixture, my home. The second call was to a contractor. The empty storefront next door had been for lease for months. I now had the capital to rent it and begin the expansion I had been dreaming of for years. A larger cafe, a dedicated event space for author readings, and a children's section. 6 months after that fateful birthday party, I stood with Oliver in the newly expanded section of my store. The scent of fresh paint and sawdust mingled with the familiar smell of old books and coffee. Light streamed through the new, large windows. My life felt like this space, brighter, bigger, and full of possibility. I hadn't heard a word about my family. Through the grapevine of distant relatives, I heard that my parents had downsized to a small condo. I heard that Ethan had moved to another state to start fresh, which was likely a euphemism for running away from his failures. I didn't know if they were happy or miserable, and I found, to my surprise, that I didn't care. Their emotional hold on me was gone. My phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Judith, the one who had looked at me with such disappointment at the party. Anya, I know it's been a while. I just wanted to say, I think about what happened a lot. You were braver than any of us knew. I hope you're happy. I smiled and typed back a simple, thank you, I am. My new family was here in this store. It was Oliver, whose unwavering support had been my bedrock. It was my employees who were passionate and loyal. It was my customers who found solace and joy within these walls. This was a family I had chosen. A family that was built on mutual respect and shared dreams, not on obligation and guilt. Looking around at the life I had built, defended, and now expanded, I felt a peace that money couldn't buy. The price of admission had been the loss of a family I never really had, but the reward was the discovery of my own strength and the freedom to write my own story, one chapter at a time. To anyone out there who feels trapped by family expectations, who feels like your successes are minimized while your siblings are magnified, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by their approval. Building your own life on your own terms is the greatest success you can achieve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from a love that was never truly yours to begin with. You are the author of your own story. Don't let anyone else hold the pen. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.